What's going on, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens? This is True for Shield Dressed, and today I want to talk about countdowns in Daggerheart. So let's get into it. Alright, so the main reason why we're talking about countdowns today is because they are so crucial to your games. Knowing it, understanding it, is fantastically needed when it comes to bringing in that tension. That needed tension for your players to really put a fire under their ass when it comes to moments in which they might be getting a little bit slow up. They might be forgetting that certain things are kind of going on in the world that will continue to go on until they deal with it. So, fantastic to have at your disposal, so you first have to understand it to be able to utilize it. Because not only will you see it come up in adversary features and in environmental features, but you'll also want to be able to use it on the fly when your players come up with these situations and these encounters out of nowhere that really you weren't prepared for, but they kind of just sort of generated for you, and so now, obviously, as a GM, you just respond. And it's better when you're prepared to deal with those situations. So that's why we're talking about that today. So for those of you that may not know what a countdown is, I think we all intuitively know what a countdown is. It counts down from something, right? But as far as game terms are considered, what is a countdown? A countdown is essentially a way to mark and track the progression of an adversary move, of a consequence of some kind, or a large event that is happening. It's just an easy way to be able to track that, so that way when it does finally get down to that zero number or reach whatever threshold we're trying to reach here, the thing triggers, whatever that so happens to be. And countdowns, as you will see here in a second, can be applied to many different situations. Alright, there are three design elements that go into countdowns. First of which being activations. Activations are of course going to activate whatever that countdown is, right? So an odd placed stone, a tripwire, or perhaps just an adversary noticing the party, entering the whatever this is, right? So that's the first one. The second one is going to be the advancement of that countdown, all right? That's exactly what it is. It just advances the countdown in one direction or another. That's really all it is in the end. As long as you understand what that progression is, you're good, right? Then the third one, of course, being the juicy part, which is the effect that is triggered. Whatever that effect is, all right? Could be bad, it could be good for the players. It does not matter. It is still an effect. And that is really all that goes into countdowns. It's that easy. You're done, right? Not exactly. They actually, in Daggerheart, go a little bit further when it comes to countdowns. It's not as simplistic as what I think we might be used to when it comes to D&D and some of the other tabletop role-playing games that are out there. These guys have gone that much further when it comes to countdowns. Clearly, they love their good little countdowns, right? You know, ticking time bomb, what have you, okay? So, love that to death. And I love the way that they actually have designed and structured this whole entire section of the manuscript, right? I think it's a great way of going about bringing countdowns into the forefront of your games and being able to utilize it more often and more easily too. Once you understand this, it is going to make things a lot easier. Particularly chase scenes are going to be so much easier for you, and you'll see why. Alright, there are two types of countdowns. You have your standard countdown and your dynamic countdown. Your standard countdown is considered your universal countdown. It's basically the thing that you're going to use when in doubt, alright? And typically for when you want to count not only your adversary's actions, but also your player's actions. They all count against this particular countdown. So if you have a countdown of 6, your player takes an action, that's 1. Your adversary, that's 2. And basically you're going from 6 to 4 until you hit 0, and then whatever it is that's supposed to trigger, triggers, okay? So that's essentially what a standard countdown is. It's very straightforward, very easy to deal with. When it comes to the standard countdown, a short countdown is considered anywhere from 2 to 4 actions, okay? Longer countdowns are considered 5 and up. So 5 and however many you want to call it. 100, it's still considered a long countdown, okay? So no matter how you slice it, 5 and up is considered long. And when it plays out in some of these encounters, especially combat encounters more particularly, it's going to feel like it's going to take forever, okay? So just be considerate when you're getting into some of these countdowns and you're starting to design them yourself. How long do you really want this to be? And then consider how many actions does that really take and whether you want to use that, okay? Just saying. Now getting into a dynamic countdown, the dynamic countdown actually has a few parts to it, and it's a little bit more intricate than, let's say, the standard countdown. And when I say a little bit, I mean a lot more intricate. There's actually a full-on table here that you're going to want to know, but we'll get into that in a second. Now, there are some actual additives that you can add into this dynamic countdown that will hopefully help progress things along a little bit more succinctly for you and your players, especially when your players start to understand like, oh, it's actually not based off of our actions, it's based off of those adversaries' actions, we got to take them down. Or vice versa, it's actually based off of our actions, so now we got to be a little bit more careful. That's what I like about these dynamic countdowns. They're a little bit more fun that way. Now, dynamic countdowns are primarily used for larger scale events, things that are pretty big in nature. Not necessarily like full-on nations, but they do have that capacity to be able to be worked in there. But at that point, you're just using days and weeks, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But the effects of what your players are doing or aren't doing and the outcomes of their roles can affect positively or negatively a lot of these countdowns, okay? But they're primarily used for those larger scale events like a spell going off, or perhaps the adversary's trying to knock down the door that the players have barred in one way, shape, or another. Lord of the Rings kind of comes to mind when we're talking about that, right? So that's one idea there. Now for these dynamic countdowns, 5 to 10 is kind of the value that you're going to be utilizing more often than not, and you'll see this in a lot of the environmental effects, like the cult ritual comes to mind. There are 2 spots in which 5 to 10 is being used, particularly 6 actually in both spots. One of them is a progressional countdown. Actually, both are really a progressional countdown, but one being done by the players and the other one's being done by the adversaries. So that's a cool one. Now, real quick, looking at the cult ritual countdown, there's actually 2 parts to this. You have your first one where they're summoning, and it's one adversary that's basically pouring the fear into it. So it's very much so predicated on that one adversary to put in the fear to progress that particular summoning ritual, that particular countdown along until it's triggered, and then there's the minor demon, right? However, there is also the one that is a detriment to your players that basically makes their hope die go from a D12 to a D10, which is incredibly fun to deal with. But we'll say that much. But there's a countdown there that they can progress to deal with whatever this desecration is that's just around, to hopefully mitigate that down and destroy it completely and work that countdown all the way to 0, so that way their hope die goes back to being a D12. Now with progressional countdowns, it's actually a part of the umbrella of the dynamic countdown, okay? So you have your progressional and you have your consequential that fall underneath the dynamic countdown. So that's the very interesting and rather tedious part about this, but once you get it, I tell you what, once you get it, it's going to free you up so much more, and it's going to make your game so much more epic. Reason being is because now all of a sudden the tension is going to be able to be cut with a knife just because you're utilizing these particular rules, okay? So let's look at the table and see what it is that we have when it comes to progressional and consequential countdowns. All right, so looking at the table, we do have some roll results and what they equal when it comes to progress and consequence advancement. So what we have here with the failure with fear, the progress advancement actually ends up being no advancement at all. And I would even just caveat this, just very barely caveat this with saying, why not make it no advancement, but then their next roll for them to actually be able to progress this thing is done at disadvantage. I'm just saying, just a consideration. You don't have to do it, obviously, but just an idea. Why not add in a little bit more of a detriment because they had a failure with fear? However, the consequence advancement ends up being ticked down by 2. Now, when we're looking at the failure with hope on the progress side, again, no advancement. However, with the consequence, it's only ticked down by 1. So you're starting to see how this all starts to meet in the middle a little bit, right? Especially with the success with fear. You now have a tick down by 1 on both. Whereas the success with hope is a tick down by 2 for the progress and no advancement for the consequence. Now, when we're looking at the critical success side, I like that they actually added this bit in because tick down by 3 is so satisfying, especially if you were to get a critical success, right? However, on the consequential side, it says no advancement. I would even go as far as to say no advancement, but the next time they make that roll, it's at advantage. So they're that much more likely to succeed the next time they roll against that. So something to think about there. Again, you do not have to add the advantage or the disadvantage. It's just something you can throw in. That's what I do. I find it's a little bit more fun that way, but at the same time, it may not work for you guys, and that's perfectly fine. But those are your standard and your dynamic countdowns and how they work. They're pretty straightforward. However, the dynamic countdown requires just a little bit of extra work and study. And once you have that down, trust me, it is so freeing to use. And it's a lot more fun that way to use the dynamic countdowns. It allows your players to have a lot more impact on the story and on a lot more impact on that particular countdown when they do get to roll against that, and then especially if they do like a critical success, if they get that, or a failure with fear, just makes it so much more interesting. And again, like I said, you're going to be able to cut that tension with a knife. It's going to be great. However, we're not quite done yet, because there are some advanced options that we can utilize here. Although you're fine with just the standard and dynamic, trust me, those are just fine as is. You would not be served incorrectly by utilizing those, okay? However, these advanced options are a lot more fun, especially when you add them into your dynamic or even into your standard countdowns. A lot more fun this way. So the first one being your randomized countdown. This is fantastic to have when you want to just keep your players on their toes, so that way they're really not sure what kind of countdown they're going to get. Maybe they're delving through an old dungeon, old tomb of some kind, and basically some of those traps might be a little older than they should be, so some of them are really taut and ready to go, some of them not so much, and so the countdowns on those from the moment in which they would trigger aren't exactly all the same. And that's a great way to utilize that, is you can make a trap that has a countdown 1d6, which basically should tell you that it's a randomized number based off of the d6. So whenever you do go to roll for that countdown, you're rolling that d6, and whatever number it shows, that's where it starts. And then time ticks on. And that would be really fun to do, especially if you have like that particular walkway that's filled with stones that are the triggers that will activate those traps, and they're all randomized countdowns, so that way when a player steps on it, they have no clue. Nothing happens, they keep going. And then 1, 2, 3, and bam, it just starts the attack. I'm just saying, I think that'd be a lot of fun, but that's just me. But that's the randomized countdown, and I think that's what's just so much fun about that. Now, looking at the loop countdown. The loop countdown is more of a countdown that is a continuous thing, because let's face it, the loop kind of implies it, right? So if you have a loop 4 countdown, basically every 4 actions, this particular countdown is going to trigger. And that's such a great way to basically show that something is reloading, that something is just going to continuously happen. Whether that's a healing effect, whether that is a trap, whatever the case may be, that is going to be a continuous thing. That could even be, now this is where you can kind of get a little bit big brain with these countdowns, that could even be a setup and within a bastion of some kind. Let's say your players have created their own fortress or their own keep of some kind and have gotten people in. And essentially they all have different jobs. Well, how do you track when those jobs are occurring, when they've done them, when they haven't done them? What does that look like? How long does it take that individual? You could start utilizing some of these countdowns. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and utilize those to really track what is or is not being done, or how quickly is it being done within that keep and or fortress. All right, now for your increasing and decreasing countdowns. This kind of falls under the looped countdown, where basically for every 8 actions, this thing is going to occur, right? But if you have a decreasing loop countdown of 8, that means it's going to go from 8 triggering, and then once it loops, it goes to 7 triggering, and then the 6 triggering, and then the 5 triggering. So you're going to constantly have it on this loop until it can trigger no longer, okay? Then same goes for the increasing. If it's an increasing from 8, then it'll go to 9, then it'll go to 10, and then to 11, and so on and so forth. Now, there are a multitude of ways of using increasing and decreasing looped countdowns, but one of the ways that I see using the increasing one is going to be for, like, say, a crossbow team, where the crossbow team keeps reloading, but they get more and more tired as the event goes on, as that encounter progresses, right? That countdown is just going to keep going up because of that, right? So that's one way of using it. Now, a way to use your decreasing countdowns would be something like a cave-in, where it starts to collapse on the player slowly but surely, and increasing as basically rocks start to fall. And you can use that as a way of rocks falling until it hits 0, and then the entire cave has indeed collapsed. So for the final countdown option that we're going to talk about today is going to be the chase countdown. The chase countdown is going to be something you're going to utilize at random moments. It's going to be a lot. It also could be very, very few times that you end up using this, because your players might not chase a single individual down. However, it's going to come up randomly, and your players may never be chased. That's the other part. It's not just your players chasing, it's your players being chased as well. That's how usable this chase countdown system is actually going to be, and it's, like I said, random when this comes up. So knowing this and understanding this, or at least the key concepts, and maybe having a reference of some sort right on your DM screen ready to go. If anything's on the DM screen, let it be that, okay? Make sure your DM screen has a progressional sort of chase countdown ready to go for you. With that table, with how to do it, Get the rules on there. Trust me, you're going to want it. But what you have here is going to be your chased individual and your chaser, your pursuer and pursuee. So what this looks like is basically 2 different countdown dice that you are tracking. Sounds like a lot, I know. However, so what you're doing here is you're basically setting whatever that size dice that's determining the amount of time. So I would say probably a D10, D6, even a D4 is amenable. A D4 perhaps in a marketplace, whereas a D6 for a larger sort of situation, and then a D10 if they're like on the road and they're just riding after each other. That's going to denote the amount of time, or rather the amount of actions, the successful actions that are required in order to chase down that person, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to, after you set that dice, you're going to then set it to the highest value. Okay, because they're going to have to bring that all the way down to then catch that particular individual. Whereas the escaping individual, you're going to take that same dice that you have set for the pursuer, and you're going to go ahead and set that down to a semi-low value, depending on how far away you want them to be. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the pursuer's value to meet the escapee's value. Okay, so if there's no advancement from the escapee, they're staying right there, which means your players, if they're successful, are gaining on the escapee. However, if they actually move that along, then it starts to be this like chase that goes down and nothing's happening. Like there's no change in between the distance. However, they are moving things along. So the escapee might actually get away if they reach 0, whereas the pursuers rather, are basically trying to make up that difference is really what's happening. Is they're trying to make up that difference, meet them, and of course, beat them. Now, another way of describing this to your players could be in ranges. So let's say the difference is 4 for your players. You just then count the number of range bands up until you hit the 4 value. So if melee is your number 1, very close being number 2, close being 3, and then far is going to be your 4th one there, you can tell them that they're at far range from the escaping party. We're just assuming that the players right now are pursuing somebody and there's somebody that's escaping trying to get away from them. However, the vice versa is very much so true for the party. If they're being chased, somebody's being at far range, that's still scary enough to deal with, okay? But not necessarily outside the realm of possibility, especially if you're using a D10. They might just be out of sight. If they're beyond that, like let's say the value's 6 or better, they're just out of sight right now. Doesn't mean that they're not in hot pursuit, just means that they're out of sight at the moment. Might give them a little bit of a reprieve, but they are by no means out of the woods at that point. So you can kind of see how this is really an interesting way to go about chase scenes, because this is vastly different, but this isn't just your typical old chase scene through a marketplace necessarily. However, you can use it for a marketplace and just use that D4 value or that D6, depending on how long you want this to go for. But really and truly, it doesn't have to even be used for that. I look at it for even larger things than that, and I think this is great. I think this is a great way to use a chase scene countdown in general, which sometimes can be a little fluid and a little weird to utilize at first when you first start out with this, but it is so much better than the almost non-existent chase rules for D&D and a lot of other role-playing games. But to that point, I hope you can actually see how these countdowns work really for a lot of different contexts, a lot of different possibilities within the game. For whatever you could be creating, whatever you could be thinking of, whether that's in the moment or whether you're crafting it at home and just kind of prepping for the game night. Especially when a player is about to craft something themselves, countdowns are a great way to show whether something's working in the way that it should, or whether that it's maybe a little bit shorter than it should be, or maybe a little bit longer than it should be, especially when they're coming up with like a bomb or something like that. It might take a little bit longer. Or when it comes to a ritual of some kind, a particular spell that they're casting, it might take a little bit more time if they're interrupted or if there's some form of a distraction that is pulling their attention away from what they're supposed to be doing. Countdowns are a great way to do that, especially progressional countdowns, where that kind of success with hope or success with fear, whether that's a failure with fear, actually has a lot of impact. So I do like the way that Daggerheart has gone through and created this. These few pages in the manuscript are so worth reading. And especially when you do finally understand this, you're going to be so ready to actually bring this into your games at random, at will. Whenever the players decide that this is what they want to do, you could throw a countdown on it in no time flat. And hopefully Hopefully you're not scared to use them, okay? But hopefully this helps you to utilize countdowns a little bit more often in your games when you might not have used them before, or you may not have fully understood them to use them. So I'm hoping this has helped you guys in some way, shape, or form, especially when it comes to crafting, whether that's your little homebrew stuff that you got going on that you're creating for your players, or whether your players are creating it themselves, and maybe they're just not as good as they wanted to be. Maybe that roll wasn't as solid as they wanted it to be, and you could use that progressional one to really increase the amount of time it takes to complete the thing, or vice versa, decrease it, and all of a sudden it's not really what they were going for. The target value they were going for was not it at all. So hope that helps. Hope that demystifies countdowns for you, and hopefully makes it a little bit easier for you to utilize, especially when those random moments do come up. So, if you are new to the channel, we are a group of friends and military members that absolutely love tabletop RPGs, and we believe that no matter what system you play and no matter what system you enjoy, you should be able to have enough content to be able to make every game night an epic game night. So if you like Lancer, DC-20, Daggerheart, D&D, World of Darkness, and even the Genesis system, Star Wars, The Legend of the Five Rings, or just your core Genesis, we're going to be the channel for you. So consider subscribing, hitting that bell notification so you don't miss a single one of those videos. So until the next one, keep that shield wall strong.